Charles Penhallow, August 24th, 2001.
Well, after my years at Wahiawa, I found that the company had sold the Wahiawa station to RCA, and so they transferred me into Honolulu, and I said to the boss, you know, I was educated in all this engineering stuff, and I end up as a telegraph operator, and maybe I ought to have something to do with the making of the business. So, okay, they put me in the engineering department. So that's how come I'm eligible to become a member of the engineering department. Up to that point, the engineer at Hawaiian Telephone Company was a single man who had worked for the company since 1910, relatively uneducated, and he did things by rule of thumb, like 19 gauge and open wire in the country and 22 gauge in the city. And sometimes that was too much or too little, either way or the other. And although he'd worked for the company since 1910, he never learned how to pronounce Hawaiian words. For example, Pohukaina Street to him was Pokalani Street. And I pointed out that Pohukaina Street and Pokalani Street are not in the same locations in the city. He says, hey, where'd you come from? Where'd you get education? So then he was talking about Pokalani Street. We finally got it straightened out that he meant Pohukaina Street. And he said it was down in Kakiako, says he. One of the things that I ran into was that I found that even though I was no longer a telegraph operator, the skilled employees at the phone company were being hired away by Fort Shafter and by Hickam Field, by Pearl Harbor. And so they said, Charles, you got to do some of the radio work in your spare time. So I would work at the phone company in the engineering department during the day, and at night I would work in the telegraph department. And that is how come I was on duty on December 7th, 1941, when the bombs dropped on Pearl Harbor. But remember that trans-Pacific telephone calling was expensive and a novelty, and people just didn't use service. Sometimes a whole weekend would go by and not one single call. The only people who would use the service were people like Doris Duke. She'd get on there and talk by the hour, never mind that it cost $7 a minute. And so my duty was to go on. They turned the circuit off at 2:30 in the morning on December 7th, because 2:30 in the morning was 5 o'clock San Francisco time, because at that time 2.5 hours was the difference between Hawaii time and West Coast time. It wasn't until after the war that they went to a straight 2 hours to the standard time. And of course during the war there was a 1 hour of daylight saving time, so we had a lot of daylight to fool around with after we went off work in the afternoon, go to the beach. Well, I had to go into the telephone company building at 5:30 that morning and open the circuit up to San Francisco. And we had a privacy device called the A3 privacy, which made it possible to scramble the signal. The signal was split up into 5 bands, and every 20 seconds the splitting would be rearranged. And so that made it fairly foolproof for anybody who wanted to tune it in. But also, if anybody wanted to tune it in, they not only had to pick up all those garbled signals, they had to know what frequency to use to pick up the one coming from San Francisco, and what frequency to use for the signal going out of Honolulu. So then, when I came to work on December 7th, there was a lady on the SS Lurleen, which was still at sea, headed for San Francisco, and the lady sent a word that she wanted to make a call to Honolulu at 7 o'clock Honolulu time. So 7 o'clock Honolulu time, we communicated with the Lurleen, and they said, well, she's still in bed and she doesn't want to talk until later. Well, she never did talk later, because by that time everything went into radio silence because of the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Well, about that time, a call came through to one of the local radio stations from one of the big news agencies on the mainland, saying, are you in a position where you can see what's going on in Pearl Harbor? Yes. Would you be able to talk on a nationwide network? Yes. All right, you're on. You're going to talk on a nationwide network. Tell what you're seeing. Just then a female voice says, Honolulu, interrupt. The censors will not pass this call. So the call never went through. And of course at that time my grandmother died in California, and I tried to get a priority to go through, and they said, you of all people should know better than that. Grandmothers are dying all the time. She was a 90-year-old woman. So you can't not get a priority to make this call. So we didn't get the message through to our grandmother's people what to do with the body until about March. This is December. I think that now I've told you enough of interest there, and we'll go through some of these pictures. There's a picture that you should see that it's a picture of me as a child, age 2, was taken by R.J. Baker. R.J. Baker was a well-known photographer here in Honolulu, and R.J. Baker was also a well-to-do person owning property in Waikiki. I think he owned property that is by the Nimitz, or entrance to Nimitz Highway and Kalakaua Avenue. I think he owned that property and had a studio there. But he called himself a communist, but he was a rich communist. And when I went to University of Hawaii at age 16, I found that R.J. Baker was there taking a post-grad course. So he had taken pictures of me, and then he put out the Bishop Museum put out a picture of R.J. Baker's pictures from the old days. And in there is the picture of me at the age of 20 that he had taken, but it's not identified. But if you look in there, you'll recognize me when I looked about 20 years old. Now, underneath this picture of me as a child is a picture of the Lahaina Wharf in Lahaina. Unfortunately, the old days of rowing the passengers out to the ship waiting out in the ocean between Lahaina and Lanai, they decided it was too dangerous, so they put a wharf at Mala, and the road is still there. It's called Wharf Road or Mala Road, perhaps, and it's near the Seventh-day Adventist church that is there, and there's also a Buddhist temple right at the beginning of that road. And they thought it was just wonderful that the big ships could tie up at the pier, but what they had overlooked was that there's a lot of side current. Consequently, the big ships couldn't do it. And I think the pier, parts of it may still be standing, but they don't recommend anybody. You could drive automobiles right out to the end of it, but I don't think you can do that anymore. And let me see if there's something else I can tell you. Incidentally, the reason that I have this picture is because I have 3 books that I use for reference. One of them is Thrum's Annual, 1900. Another is the Matson Navigation Company book about tourism to Hawaii, of course, by Matson ships. And that is dated 1922, 1923. And I'll come to that a little bit later. There is a picture of a steamer called the SS Lurleen, but that's not the Lurleen we all knew. It was, in that book they say this is a fine modernized ship, and it wasn't any modernized ship. They didn't even know what air conditioning was in those days. And for cream for their milk, for example, they had canned milk. You didn't get anything fresh on those ships when you were riding on them, but it was considered great luxury. Now this picture is a picture taken of me when I worked for the phone company, and it came out of a phone company magazine that was issued in December 1941. Great confusion at that time because of the bombs dropping on Pearl Harbor, and nobody put a date on that booklet. And at that time, I called attention to one of our vice presidents that there was no date on there to indicate when it was printed. And he looked at me very disdainfully and said, "Charles, if you have something important to say, say it, otherwise keep quiet." And years later, people found that book and they said, "For crying out loud, I've been through this book top to bottom and I cannot find out when it was written." Well, it was written in December 1941. And so that picture shows me as having had 5 years service at the phone company. By the time they got through with me, I had 44 years. Now, have you got a list of the Thrum's Annual of all the sugar companies in Hawaii?
What page is that?
Well, it'll look like this. You'll find it in there.
Lower right.
And it's 2 pages. It lists so many sugar companies. There are 2 on Molokai and 2 on Lanai. And as far as I know, they were never very functional. But now, today, there's only 1 sugar company on the island of Maui. There's 1 sugar company on the island of Kauai. That's the whole sugar industry of today. But at this time, I didn't even count the number of names on here, but there's plenty of them. Among them is Olowalu Sugar Company. I knew the manager of Olowalu Sugar Company, and I used to go there and visit. And this year, I went to a wedding reception that was held on the grounds of the manager's house at Olowalu Sugar Company. And the old building is still there, the old manager's house, right on the water with a beautiful view out over to Lanai and to Kaho'olawe. And ocean looks very inviting. I understand there are a lot of sharks on the water there, and people have been badly hurt off Olowalu as a result of that. The old pier where they used to do the shipping of the sugar is there in skeleton form, and the foundations for the sugar mill are still there too. But it's a beautiful location. We sat for dinner out under a very large tree, and of course the weather's very dry there. Never had to worry about any rain or wind. Perfectly delightful. And so the manager always had the best house in the place. In fact, when we lived in Wailuku, my father was manager of a sugar company there. We had a beautiful big home, lots of servants provided by the company, and also a guest cottage for guests, because when big shots came to Maui, or that's true of the other islands as well, Kauai and Hawaii, it was expected that the manager of the plantation or a ranch had to provide home residence for these people, because the hotels had a lot lacking, you might say, and didn't have good dining rooms and so on. So we had a washerwoman, we had a chauffeur, we had a man to tend the chickens, a man to milk the cows. We had 2 cows, and horses had to be tended, and all these things were part of our life at Wailuku. So when my father left the plantation in 1932, all that went down the drain. But since that was Depression time, he was able to buy 6 acres of land in Kula and build a 4-bedroom, 3-bath house, a 2-car garage, and a 10,000-gallon water tank, which is still important today in Kula, for $6,000. And eventually, the owner of that property, long after my family got out of there, sold that whole thing for $350,000. But it was a good investment at the time. In this picture that shows the Onamea Arch, below it is a picture that you would get by being in a boat off the coast of Kaupapa on Molokai, and that is the same scene that is shown in Jurassic Park number 3. If you've been to that movie, you'll see the same scene, and it's depicted as Jurassic Park. And when I saw that thing on the movie, I thought, my gosh, that's in Hawaii somewhere, but where is it? Well, it's because not many people go out in boats off of Kalaupapa. But it's a beautiful sight. Anybody know Jack Dazzle? I know Jack Dazzle is in one of these pictures. Jack Dazzle was sort of a Beau Brummel here in town. And underneath that is a picture of Hale Mau Mau, made in 1924. In May 1924 was a major eruption of the Kilauea Volcano caused by the subsidence of the lava column to get down to below where there was a large supply of water. And the water, of course, burst into steam and caused an explosive eruption, throwing rocks, in fact boulders, up into the air. It got to be very quiet, very dangerous. And thereafter, the volcano was quiet for about 10 years. But the Matson Navigation book of 1922 says you must come to Hawaii and see the only drive-in volcano in the world. If you go up to Hale Mau Mau today, you will find the parking lot for that drive-in volcano, but the volcano is erupting someplace else, unfortunately. In fact, there was a man, there's still steam bluffs and things there. A man recently chased his hat and fell over the edge, had to be rescued. This is only about 2 weeks ago. Well, let's see what else I can find for you. There is a picture of the Volcano Road. Let's see how the time goes. You want to get these? There's a picture here of the Volcano Road, 1922. It was a beautiful, fast, straight road that went up to the volcano, one of the best roads in the state, or in the territory at that time. It was later even made wider than that, and it was just like a freeway. Well, no, I would say it was a 2-lane road, and you had to be careful to make room for any oncoming cars. But who had fast cars in those days? Barney Oldfield, perhaps. In fact, 60 miles an hour was considered pretty high speed. That's how the expression going like 60 originated. Everybody goes 60 miles an hour down the H1 freeway. Now then, there are some pictures here of the Moana Hotel, taken from the air. And also there's pictures of Duke Hanamoku and one of his brothers and a movie actress, and one of them is a close-up of that picture taken in Waikiki, which came out of the Thrums Annual, and it came out of the Matson Navigation book. Is that the one? All right. Let's see the picture. But it's enlarged in another picture you'll see on another page. And there's a picture also of the Moana Hotel, but there's a better picture showing what the Moana Hotel looked like from the air. I have to find it. Did you find it?
Yeah, it's right there. Two pictures on the same page. 13 and 14. There you go.
All right, this is the one. Only Moana Hotel, and next to it is the Outrigger Canoe Club. Outrigger Canoe Club doesn't exist there anymore, and that's where the Royal Hawaiian Hotel is now. And of course, the Outrigger has moved down by the Elks Club.
So the Moana was there before the Royal Hawaii?
Long before. I would say around 1910.
Wow.
Royal Hawaiian was opened in 1927.
And is the Moana still the same building as it was?
Yep, practically the same building. So that when the Kahala Hilton was built, people were wagging their heads saying, oh, it's too remote. People would never go to the Kahala Hilton. And Kahala Hilton, as a result, had a jitney service for their patrons so that they could get free rides into Waikiki. But, of course, now the city has outgrown that area, so that the Mandarin Kahala is one of the more popular hotels, the in-place to go if you want to stay and impress people. Now, there's another thing that I want to show
Charles,
you.
when you mentioned that the beach during the war, you didn't go to the beach. Why was that?
That barbed wire all along the beaches.
You had barbed wire along the beaches, but there were openings. You could go through there, but don't take any pictures of it.
That's, okay, that's what I had heard before, is that the barbed wire was there, but it wasn't to keep the people on the beach, from inland from going to the beach. It was, I guess, to keep people landing there.
That's
They
correct.
used it.
That's correct.
That's true, right?
That's true.
He was here then, I was here then too.
Yeah.
I'm a little younger than he is, but I was here just the same.
I'm younger than Augie Elf. Augie Elf did a very good program before this group. And however, he's a real engineer. I was just a telephone engineer.
But Mr. Crosby, you didn't go to the beach because of the barbed wire.
During the war,
Yeah.
I was in the army, but he had no business on the beach.
That was the
Gasoline was so hard to get that you had to have a coupon to get gasoline. And I was the low man on the totem pole. I had A coupons, which meant that I was allowed 12 gallons. I was allowed 10 gallons a month. And that was increased finally to 12 gallons a month, and then finally to 14 gallons a month. And there are pictures of the coupons in this file somewhere. And also, there's a picture of the old Lurleen saying that it's just recently been refurbished. And in addition to that, on some pages you find handwritten entries. They're taken from my diary. I've been writing a diary since June 1929, when I graduated from high school. One of my friends gave me a diary, and I've been keeping a 5-year diary ever since. I've got a stack of them, but they give you only 5 lines to write what you want to say. So you have to be very careful what you say. And in there are my entries for December 7th, December 9th, 8th, and 9th, and one of the entries. And one of the entries in there tells you that the company has decided to increase the number of lines to the mainland from 1 to 3, and this is a good decision. I put that in there because people are telling me, oh, Charles, you're mistaken. There were 7 lines to the mainland on December 7th. That's not true. And I fortunately have this diary entry. I had also the log of my entries in December 1941, where I was on duty that day. And Cam Ming Wong, who was an assistant of mine at the phone company, had saved it from being thrown into the fire. They were going to throw all these records away. And he saved it out. Now I'm wondering whether I threw it in the fire. I don't seem to be able to find it. But it told all my reactions on what I did that particular day. And of course, the old ladies at the boarding house asked me what I was going to do on the afternoon of December the 7th. And I said, well, I'm going to take a nap after I have lunch. And they said, well, that's very unpatriotic. Why aren't you out looking for parachutists? Never mind what an unarmed person would do if he found a parachute that had a gun in his hand. So, not only that, they were listening to the police radio. The KGMB and KGU went off the air because they thought they would be used as guides for more Japanese planes. And so they went off the air, and you had to listen to the police radio if you wanted to get anything interesting. And these old ladies said, you know, there's a terrible thing that came out on the police radio. There was a Japanese man up on a pole with red and green lanterns signaling to submarines at the sea. And finally, the city government got wise to that, and they put in codes, and they say number 4, number 5, number 7. That was all from a code book, told what they were getting excited about, because these little ladies were saying these things. And finally, the newspaper said, one of the worst things that happened as a result of people listening to the police radio was this business about a Japanese man being up on a pole with red and green lanterns signaling to submarines at sea. The fact of the matter was that there was an employee of Hawaiian Electric legally up a pole correcting a faulty transformer, and it was not red and green, it was just red, and he was not a Japanese. Otherwise, the story was correct. How true. Well, let's just take a look here, some more things. Oh, there's a picture of a pineapple cannery. What? Yes, Bill?
Before there was wireless cable.
There was what?
Cable communication between going to the mainland. And then came wireless. Did RCA take over from?
All right, I'll tell you the story on that. Of course, the cable you're talking about was put in a little after 1900, and it was a telegraph cable, and they charged $1 a word, and you had to make a deposit of something like $25 in order to make the call, to make the telegram. And then American Marconi Company, not RCA, American Marconi Company established a wireless telegraph station at Kahuku, and because they had such high power and broadband, they had to put the receiver at Cocoa Head, which is a whole island between the the transmitter and the receiver, so that you could transmit and receive at the same time without interfering with the receivers. And so, after the war, the American Marconi Company was dissolved and replaced by a company called Radio Corporation of America, and that was 1919. And so that's how RCA got started. And of course, Roy Chapman Andrews wrote about the Gobi Desert, where he found all these fossils, and he signed it with his initials, RCA. And everybody said, how did RCA get in the picture? Roy Chapman Andrews. That was a different company, not RCA.
The towers that were in Kaneohe Bay was the competition for Marconi. It wasn't another Italian guy, in fact, trying to set up the same system as Marconi, and Marconi was just...
So I understand it was a very low-frequency telegraph, and later was replaced by a Loran station. And those towers, I think, were put up for the Loran station, which was just taken down at the time they opened up the H3 freeway. And those went from the top of a mountain to the top of a mountain. And people with airplanes had to be careful to stay out of that area so they don't get tripped up in those wires. But very low frequency. And for a while they used what they called an Alexanderson alternator that had such low radio frequency that dogs could hear it. And when they turned on that transmitter, the dogs would start howling because it was bothering their ears.
I was told when I was a kid that the structure that was built at Cocoa Head was part of a system that went around the world, and that wherever a Marconi station was, the same structure was there. so that it was a small weather structure. So it was in the Gobi Desert, it was fine, but in Hawaii it had a fireplace. It was the same building around the world. And the one in Hawaii was responsible for building. The tropics, it looked like it was built for a hardcore weather zone. Did you ever hear that?
I don't recall that. But the RCA station at Cocoa Head it was a Marconi station, receiving station, and it was the location of. It's now the location of the Lunalilo home for indigent Hawaiians, aged Hawaiians, I guess. I shouldn't say indigent. And that has been spruced up. But it was the dormitory for the people who lived at Cocoa Head, who worked at the Cocoa Head Marconi and RCA stations. And here among my diary entries is a mention of a man named Schultz. Schultz was one of the operators at Cocoa Head, and he had tuned in with one of the powerful receivers and picked up a station giving instructions in Japanese without being put through a privacy. And so we connected that up through to Navy intelligence to see if they were hearing anything of any importance after December 7th.
Lunalilo home is the old Marconi building?
I believe it is, with slight alterations, like George Washington's original hatchet, several new heads and several new hammers. Well, how are we doing on the time? Okay, 1 o'clock. Say hi to everybody. Great. Thank you, Charles. That was great.
Yeah.